Welcome back. You're watching Gravitas. In this particular segment, we talk about the cruelty by non-state actors. We've seen it in countries across the world since the Greeks and the Romans ruled their kingdoms. We've seen how they use terror as, to increase the shock value, to terrorize people and to gain large swathes of territory. We've seen it in Syria, more recently also in Iraq. And just very recently, we heard the report of an Indian soldier, the second Indian soldier whose body was found mutilated. We're going to be talking about what does the Geneva Convention too say about it, and things in a larger perspective, the nexus between some of the armies as well with these non-state actors.
And really digging into these issues about terrorism, what makes these groups function, what are their incentives? To have a discussion about this, let's introduce our guests for this segment. We first start off with Mr. R.K. Yadav. He is a former RAW officer as well as an author. Thank you so much for joining us. Also from the United States, we have Glenn Carl from Washington, D.C. He is a former intelligence officer. We appreciate your perspective. And of course, WION's chief correspondent in Islamabad, Taha Siddiqui, also providing us that perspective from Pakistan. So just to make sure everybody's on the same page, a global perspective about terrorism, not necessarily with India, Pakistan, but on the whole, how is this impacting terrorism? So let's first start with Mr. Yadav.
All right, now Pakistan's use of non-state actors or terror groups against India is well known. It gives Pakistan deniability and enables it to calibrate the level of violence in keeping with its tactical and other goals. But Pakistan was not alone in this. Here's a report by WION's Ramesh Ramachandran.
The distinction between state and non-state actors has always been tenuous in the case of Pakistan. According to American academic Christine Fair, Pakistan's first attempt at irregular warfare dates back to 1947, the year it first went to war with India. Since then, Pakistan has used asymmetric warfare to further its objectives. Fair says the employment of mujahideen, or regular troops disguised as such, has been the fundament of Pakistan's denial and deception efforts to convince domestic and international audiences that these asymmetric operations were conducted by non-state actors, thereby conferring plausible deniability to shield the state from retribution. After the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan in 1979, Pakistan again used militants and Islamists as an instrument of state policy, this time with more than a little help from the United States. And the US found in the then Pakistani Army Chief Ziaul Haq an ally eager to turn Pakistan into a hotbed of jihad. Decades later, in 2009, Hillary Clinton admitted as much before the US Congress.
Let's deal with the ISI and the Pakistani military, and let's go recruit these mujahideen. It wasn't a bad investment to end the Soviet Union, but let's be careful what we sow because we will harvest.
Over time, the lines between state and non-state actors in Pakistan have blurred, prompting Indian Foreign Secretary S. Jaishankar to say that the concept of state and non-state actors on the issue of terrorism was a false dichotomy. He said, there is a connect between state actors and non-state actors, which is why we use the word sponsored. So the state cannot escape responsibility by saying it is non-state. This is not just vis-a-vis India, it was the situation even after 9/11. Fair says that Pakistan can be expected to continue to rely on Islamist militant groups to further its agenda, and it is forcing a rethink in India.
Indian diplomats say that while Pakistan is to blame for fomenting terrorism against India, the United States cannot escape responsibility either. They make the argument that Pakistan cannot any longer be given the benefit of the doubt and that it is incumbent upon the international community, the US included, to call Pakistan's bluff. Ramesh Ramachandran, WION, New Delhi.
All right, to get perspective on this story, let's bring in our guest now. We'll first start with Mr. Yadav. Thanks again for joining us. Let's first start off with jihadist groups like this, the ones in Pakistan, the Lashkar-e-Taiba groups, many groups like this around the world. What motivates them? What is the reason why many government agencies or entities bring these groups on to solicit fear and instead of to get out their tasks? Why is that so prevalent?
They are actually Pakistan in our region, I'll say, is the main actor who is promoting this terrorism, not only here, but in Afghanistan also. They are properly trained there. They are given all state helps. They are all given all facilities to cross the borders and attack Indian posts. And they have been doing this for the last 25 years. Actually, Pakistan Army is the main sponsor of all these activities. Their Prime Minister is a figurehead. He tried to control the army when Musharraf did a coup there. And after that, every political party who is ruling Pakistan, they are fearing the terrorists.
So you're saying there's a nexus between the government and these non-state actors. That's right. But we are talking about the cruelty, that they show these non-state actors. What do you think is the reason behind the kind of tactics that they use to create this kind of fear? Talk about beheadings, talk about mutilations.
This is total violation of Geneva Convention. You see, after the 1971 war, we had 93,000 POWs in our country. We treated them well. Even General Niazi, who was the GOC of that operation, he was in our custody. We gave all sort of UK POW status defined by Geneva Convention to them. What they are doing, a soldier is not fighting some individual war.
Right.
He is fighting for a cause that is given to him by the either country.
Right.
If you catch him, you make him a POW or make him a
okay.
But even if he is wounded, it is nowhere written in any civilized society.
Right.
Okay, you kill him.
Right.
Or you mutilate his body.
Absolutely.
This is highly heinous, and this Pakistan militants and army is capable of doing this.
The Geneva Convention obviously clearly rules on the treatment given to wounded or captured military personnel as well. But going quickly across to our Bureau Chief in Pakistan, Taha Siddiqui, who's with us right now. Taha, we've seen the recent rise in tensions between India and Pakistan particularly, and now we have the second such report that an Indian soldier, his body was found mutilated. Apart from the fact that 2 other soldiers were killed and tension continues at the border. But tell us about, this nexus that, Pakistan seems to be in the talks for, the nexus between the non-state actors and the administration over there.
Well, in Pakistan also this criticism does take place and there are some commentators, some observers, some former military people who do say that there seems to be a nexus between what they call the good Taliban or the good militant here. Now, in that sense, it's just not, as you were discussing also earlier, it's just not with India or with the Kashmiri jihadis, which are allowed sort of refuge in the country, freedom to move around, but also with Afghan militants. It is a similar sort of policy. With some Sunni extremist groups, it is sort of the similar policy, and there is a lot of criticism in Pakistan or internationally also that Pakistan continues to use these proxies, even though we saw that General Rahil Sharif, who's just retiring next week, and he tried to go after militants based out of North Waziristan, but even then when that happened, we had reports of the good kind of militants, the ones that work for the Pakistani state or have an understanding with the Pakistani state. They were allowed to sort of exit the region beforehand. So definitely this criticism keeps coming up that the Pakistan state and the Pakistan military has a tolerance for some sort of militancy in the country and that militancy is then used in regional conflicts.
Right.
All right, Taha, we'll pick up with you in just a moment, but let's now continue the conversation from Washington, D.C. with Glenn, a former intelligence officer. Glenn, what about the Americans' role? How do they feel about the nexus between these non-state actors and actors, especially when it comes to many of the different terror groups out there, Al-Qaeda, Taliban? We've seen the beheadings, the cases with jihadi Johns. What type of a message is this really putting out there in the public?
Well, there are many things to say. The first point, which I think is very important, is there's a conceptual error, pardon me for saying, in the presentation about terrorism and insurgents that set the piece that we're discussing right now. The United States has never supported terrorism. We haven't supported insurgents. And the Pakistanis make use of both. But the two things are not the same, and that has a very significant impact on policy and also the obligations under the Geneva Convention and law and what our military action should be. There's a large difference between Jaish-e-Mohammed, say, or the Taliban or Al-Qaeda, and an insurgent group like Mujahideen were fighting the Soviets. They were Afghans fighting for their country as opposed to a terrorist group.
Right.
An important distinction to make. Now, to your specific question, terrorism is the tool of the weak. Its design is in the name of is in the term itself, to spread terror and to make the public afraid in areas where no normal combat by legitimate governmental entities would be likely to occur. And clearly the Pakistanis have done that in Kashmir as well as in Afghanistan.
Mr. Kaul, thanks so much for putting your points forward. But, you know, I was reading up earlier on, and back in the year 2009, Hillary Clinton came out and admitted in front of the U.S. Congress, saying that the people we're fighting today were funded some 20 years ago. She admitted, and she did say that we were locked in a struggle with the Soviet Union, and hence we had to support these jihadists at that time. So there has been much talk about the U.S., silently funding these terror organizations, these, countries who support terror.
No, I'm sorry, that is not correct. She acknowledged what has been known for decades, that the United States supported the Mujahideen. The United States did not fund ever, not 1 cent, what was or became Al-Qaeda or any other terrorist group. Mujahideen, yes, that was actually always through the Pakistanis, because the Pakistanis insisted that they maintain control. But there's a big difference, and it's frankly a line spread by the Russian intelligence service that the United States is the origin, or the CIA, of the creation of Al-Qaeda. That's simply balderdash. It is not true. And whether that is true or not, even more important perhaps for the subject of our discussion, is the distinction between terrorist groups like Jaish-e-Mohammed or the Taliban frequently, or Al-Qaeda or others, and an insurgent. It is true, however, that from the perspective of India, what concerns India is what Pakistan does. And Pakistan certainly has supported terrorist activities in Kashmir. They may deny it, but that they have. But there's a big distinction, and Hillary Clinton never acknowledged that. She said we supported the insurgents. Now, from the insurgents, there were jihadists that evolved, but that's not the same thing.
All right, Mr. Kaul, we'll come back to you in a moment, but continuing the conversation, we want to find out what explains such barbaric acts. These jihadi groups, such as Islamic State, they've carried out many of these crimes. WION's Daniele Pagini has seen some of it from the ground. Take a look.
The beheading of an Indian soldier in the line of control in Kashmir has renewed focus on jihadi groups, their ideology, their motivations, and the atrocities that they commit. In Afghanistan, Taliban commander Mullah Dadullah had himself shot on video beheading his enemies. There was also Al-Qaeda leader in Iraq, Abu Musab al-Zarqawi, who was notorious for killing Shias. But Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi seems to have overtaken all of them in the cruelties he and his movement, the Islamic State, has inflicted on fellow Iraqis, whether Sunni, Shia, Christian, and even women and young girls. Videos have been shot of captured Iraqi army personnel being shot, mass graves have been found, women sold and enslaved, and suicide bombers widely used. Islamist terror groups claim the acts of violence is justified by Islam. They say it is an order of God. They have called for a worldwide fight against the supposed enemies of Islam, and they glorify violent offenders killed during a combat as martyrs for God's cause.
But scholars have clearly said that Islam do not allow murder or suicide, and that terrorist is not Islamic, and the defense of Muslim territories can be pursued only under strict and very clearly defined conditions and regulation. Daniele Pagani in Erbil for WION.
All right, in fact, that was our correspondent Daniele Pagani continuously sending out reports. Talking about this, sir, if I can come to you, Mr. R.K. Yadav, let's talk about beheadings and the way, terrorist groups like the IS have more recently started to post online videos for years now to shock people, to terrorize people, and to capture swathes of territory, really. What is your understanding and reading of this entire situation? We're seeing these number of cases increasing. By the day, they're recruiting young boys from across the world.
This is the strategy of this Islamic terrorism. And you see that there was a jihadi who was just every media was showing that how he was cutting the heads of a prisoner openly in the media.
Right.
Here, I think this Pakistanis, what they are doing, they are taking a cue from that act. But that is why they mutilated the body of a soldier who was not dead at that time. He was injured, and that what barbaric act they did, that cue they are taking from the IS.
So are you saying that each of these groups is sort of trying to outdo the other group? Each one is trying to make a point that's even more horrific just to show their power or how callous they can be?
But this brutality cannot stop Indian forces to guard their borders. This brutality is sporadic. It cannot be, you can say, considered as a, you can say, deterrent to stop Indians to guard its borders.
Right.
Our forces will definitely guard our borders, and they will try to contain the terrorism which they are spreading here. But these acts are totally in violation of the Geneva Convention. I'll request Pakistan government also that please stop all these things. We can also do. We are having their soldiers. We capture their soldiers.
Right.
We give them due respect as this a human being should be given. But these acts of Pakistan are totally in violation of Geneva Convention, which international forums should make a, you can say, point to this government, and they should ask them to please restrain them.
Right, right. The Geneva Convention, of course, bans the mutilation and ill treatment, but these terrorist groups continue to, world over, show contempt for all such norms. We are going to be talking about what the Geneva Convention says in just a bit. But Taha, very quickly coming back to you before we move on and go to Mr. Karl next. So Pakistan in its present form, there seems to be no change in the way the state over there is functioning. Can we expect now Pakistan to continue to rely on Islamist militant groups to further its agenda, because nothing seems to be changing?
Well, that definitely has been the policy that we've seen as of yet. If you remember in 2014, when 130 children were killed in a school attack in Peshawar city by Pakistani Taliban, which are known to be anti-state, at that time, there was the government got together, the military got together, and they said that they will go after all sorts of militancy in the country, and they will have a zero tolerance policy for militancy. But 2 years later, in 2016, as we talk, we continue to hear of such militants operating in Balochistan province. We know that the Afghan Taliban chief, he was killed in a drone strike in Balochistan. We know of other sectarian militants, Sunni militants operating out of South Punjab, and Kashmiri militants operating out of South Punjab. They continue to sort of have the same policy, and nothing seems to be changing, though we've heard that they have been pressurized now with the United States asking for them to do more, but also China getting involved in Pakistan with regards to investment in Pakistan, $46 billion of investment. and because of which Pakistan military and the Pakistani state is under pressure from international and regional actors, and maybe that pressure could one day be realized into some action on ground.
All right, Taha, stay with us. We'll continue the conversation, but let's now go to Glenn in Washington, D.C. Glenn, let's pick up this conversation. You know, do we see these different groups, the role between the state actors and the non-state actors? Are we seeing this sort of get worse and worse? You know, of course, with 9/11, the Taliban, the Al-Qaeda, now ISIS. Do we see each group sort of becoming worse than the previous one? And if so, why is that the case?
Well, I'm afraid that the answer appears to be yes to your question, that ISIS is worse than Al-Qaeda, and Al-Qaeda is certainly worse than the Mujahideen were, who were a coherent military force, actually, fighting a series of forces. So unfortunately, the answer to that seems to be yes, for two reasons, I guess, very simplistically. It's a tactic to create horror and expand the apparent power of the group. In that sense, it is effective. That's what terrorism seeks to do. And because these groups explicitly reject all of the norms of the international community, which they view as based on infidel practices. And so they simply try to revert to their interpretation, which of course is contested by the mainstream series of scholars and schools of thought in Islam, but they revert to the 7th century, and in particular to the time when the Mongols captured and sacked Baghdad.
Right.
And the reaction was, we can do anything, we must do anything to defend the faith. And they perverted this for that reason. They rejected all of the norms that the gentleman outlined, and which we all share.
All right, Mr. Karl, you know, I'll ask you one question and go with the same question to Mr. Yadav next. But my question to you now is that, you know, you've worked with the American intelligence. You can help us understand things better. How does this nexus between the non-state actors and the state really work? How do they cooperate? At any point, do you see ideologies matching for both these parties, meaning the non-state actors as well as the administration that cooperates with them?
Well, sometimes the answers vary depending on the circumstance, the place, and the time. But the simple answer, I think, with regard to Pakistan, sadly, tragically, particularly for India, and everyone touched by the ISI's actions, is yes, at least in part. There are factions, elements within ISI that appear to embrace and to share the ideologies of jihad. Now, I don't know that as an entity or as a government they share them. They certainly cynically exploit them, but some factions appear to share them. This comes from, frankly, Islam's struggle to react to the modern world, and then Pakistan to define itself as a state. And if it doesn't define itself in opposition to India and in affirmation of Islam, what is Pakistan?
All right.
And all of that comes together.
All right, Mr. Yadav, the same question to you very quickly. We're running out of time, yeah.
Actually, after the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan, Pakistan and USA, they collided and raised Taliban and Al-Qaeda. It boomeranged on them.
So you feel like it was a counter response back. It came back to bite them.
Now it is troubling them. Those jihadis which were raised by them, now they are still the actors there, and they are just, you can say, proving a sort of big hurdle for the restoration of peace in Afghanistan also. And those elements are responsible for terrorism in Pakistan. So they are victim of their own deeds. I should say very bluntly to them.
All right, all right. Mr. Karl, would you like to respond to that?
Well, your clip of Hillary Clinton when she was Secretary of State, I think, is accurate in this regard. She said sometimes it is useful for the United States or for a state to support insurgents, and if we do, we have to be cognizant about the likelihood of unintended consequences. And it is true that the Mujahideen who received support from the United States some of them morphed into jihadists. That's a terrible consequence. That is true. It's not true, however, to say that the United States supported jihadists. The consequence, unintended, terrible, is that they had a different agenda. We were seeking to support the Afghans against the Soviets, and some of them decided to try to bring Allah to all of us at the end of the sword.
All right, and real quick, let's get to Taha Siddiqui in Islamabad. Taha, you know, there's been a lot of finger pointing at Pakistan, not only from India, but even the United States. What is the mood like in Pakistan when they're sort of being dubbed as the sanctuary, the haven for many of these ingrown terror groups? Some of them, people say, are just copycats, just sort of inspired by these larger entities like ISIS and Al-Qaeda. What is the mood like there with Pakistanis responding to those allegations?
Well, most of Pakistan sort of like when you talk to the military about this, they say that they are fighting a war against terrorism right now. They were the frontline ally of the United States. They also say that when the United States came in the 80s, at that time, the jihadis were used as a tool. That was the policy. The Islam was used as a policy to sort of rally people together. So because of which these jihadis were created, now the Pakistani state does that and has been doing that even before the Americans came. But that's the sort of here, whenever they say that, there's this sort of a message or communication from them that they do this because of the fact that they have regional fears of in Afghanistan, of India, and they want to keep themselves sort of relevant in the region. And in that sense, there's sort of deniability at times when you say that there has been a sort of a backlash, there has been this consequence, but sometimes they agree that there has been collateral damage, but they say this is collateral damage when you fight the way we do, and then they point fingers to India, Afghanistan, saying they're doing the same thing in their own sort of respective authority.
Unfortunate times we all are living in, where these terrorist groups, unleash upon psychological warfare. It's an essential element now in the military strategy.
Worse as we see it.
Absolutely. So really all the state actors must step up, the administrations, the countries, and must stand united against all these terrorist groups. Otherwise, things will only get worse. This evening, I thank you, Mr. Glenn Carl, Mr. R.K. Yadav, also Taha Siddiqui, for joining us and sharing your thoughts with us on the show tonight.
And that does it for this edition of Gravitas. Don't forget to tune into this story, plus all of our bulletins on our website, WIONnews.com, and you can track them on our digital, mobile, and social media platforms. Thanks again for joining us.